Hey, welcome. Today, we are jumping into a really powerful sermon that basically gives a roadmap for spiritual growth. It's a journey, right? It goes from figuring out a deep-seated spiritual sickness all the way to embracing this totally new identity and purpose. So let's jump right in and see where it takes us.
God and Us presents Proclamation to the Nation.
Right off the bat, the sermon does not pull any punches. It kicks things off with this incredibly stark warning from Galatians. I mean, the stakes are so high. This isn't about, a few minor mistakes. It's about an entire way of life that, according to the source, just doesn't line up with inheriting God's kingdom. So it immediately makes you ask, okay, what are these things and how do I steer clear of them? So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we're going to diagnose the core problem, this sickness of envy. Then we'll hit the turning point, what it means to be a spiritual newborn. After that, we'll dive into this idea of being God's sacred sanctuary, how that can get corrupted, and then finally, how to get on the path to real wisdom and growth. All right, so the sermon starts by diagnosing this fundamental spiritual sickness. And we're not talking about just a bad habit. It's described as a condition that's really rooted deep inside, what the source calls our old nature. To get to the bottom of this, the sermon focuses on a specific Greek word, Phthonos. Now, it's usually translated as envy, but it's so much deeper than just being jealous. It's that painful, resentful feeling you get when you see someone else has an advantage. And the sermon argues this isn't just some passing emotion, it's a powerful force that actually drives a ton of destructive behavior. And that envy, that Phthonos, it doesn't come alone. It's listed right alongside things like drunkenness, malice, and slander. The key point the sermon makes here is that these aren't just one-off mistakes. They're all symptoms of a lifestyle. The way someone consistently acts when they're living out of that old nature. Okay, so after that pretty heavy diagnosis, the sermon completely shifts gears to the solution. And it's not about just, trying harder to be a good person. It describes this radical transformation, a total spiritual rebirth. This is the big turning point. And the contrast here is, well, it's night and day. On one side, you've got the old nature, what the Bible calls flesh and blood, which, as we heard, can't inherit the kingdom. That's the old self that has to go. But on the other side, you've got the new nature. This is about becoming a new creation, being spiritually born and ready to move forward in a brand new life. So if you're a new creation, how would you actually grow? The sermon gives us this really amazing metaphor. You have to crave pure spiritual nourishment with the exact same intensity that a newborn baby craves milk. It's not just a nice idea. It's absolutely essential for your survival and growth in this new life. And here's the part that's a real gut check. The sermon points out that someone could be a believer for 25 years and still be a spiritual infant if they're not getting that genuine spiritual milk. It's a huge reminder that maturity isn't about how much time has passed. It's all about the nourishment. So, what does this nourished, growing new creation actually look like? Well, the next part of the sermon moves into this profound idea about identity. And the argument is that understanding this is absolutely crucial for your spiritual health. Okay, this is a huge idea. The sermon's core claim, drawing from 1 Corinthians 3, is that the community of believers, you, together, is the dwelling place of God, a sacred sanctuary. That's a massive shift in how you see yourself, right? It's not about being a sinner trying to be good, but about being a holy place where God himself lives. Now, if you are a sacred place, then the biggest danger is desecration. And the sermon introduces another important Greek word for this, Phtheiro. It means to corrupt, to destroy, to ruin. And in this context, it specifically means to cause the church, God's sanctuary, to swerve away from the holiness where it's supposed to be. And the warning that's attached to this is incredibly severe. It really shows you just how seriously God takes the holiness of his dwelling place, which is the community of believers. Corrupting that sanctuary has some dire, dire consequences. So this brings up a really important question. How does this sacred space even get corrupted in the first place? The sermon actually lays out a very clear pathway, showing how outside influences can sneak in and undermine the good work being built inside you. The whole principle is found right here in this verse. The source material translates bad company a bit more specifically as bad conversations or even false teachings. The idea is that the things you listen to, the ideas you let in, have the power to tear down the good habits and character that are being formed in you. And this process gets broken down into 4 clear steps. First step is exposure. You're either actively taking part in or just passively listening to these corrupting conversations. Second, that exposure leads to incitement. It starts to stir up old desires you thought were gone. Third, that leads to suffocation. All those new good habits the Spirit was building in you get choked out and abandoned. And the final result? Regression. As the sermon puts it, your final state ends up being worse than when you started. So after all these serious warnings, what's the goal? What's the way forward? Well, the last part of the sermon focuses on the positive outcome of this whole journey, finding true wisdom and maturity, and it all comes through humility. The sermon talks about 2 competing kinds of wisdom. You've got worldly wisdom, which thinks it's smart by the world's standards, but is actually foolishness to God. Then you have godly wisdom, which, funny enough, often looks like foolishness to the world. The sermon really stresses that this true wisdom isn't for the proud, but for the humble, what it calls the pequeninos, or the little ones. Okay, so let's put it all together. The sermon basically gives us a clear regimen for spiritual health. It kicks off with humility, admitting you're a child who needs to grow. That humility sparks a desire for pure, unadulterated teaching, but that has to be balanced with discernment. You got to check what you're hearing against the scriptures. This is all built on your identity as a child of God. And finally, you need perseverance to actively guard the good things the Spirit is building in you. And that brings us right to the end. You know, the entire sermon really boils down to this one single, powerful question. Every single day, with every choice we make, we are feeding one of 2 natures. And the path to spiritual maturity, well, it starts by answering this question honestly. Which one are you feeding today?